Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for participating in this conversation. We do actually want to reach out to you guys in a bit to see what connections you can make to the organizations that my guests are involved with. Brendan, if you would just explain first, because I think maybe people don't know as much about C40 as they should, but it's your opportunity to tell us a little bit about what your organization does and what your membership is committed to.
Yeah, well, pleased to be here, thanks. We're a network of global megacities. We're now 90, just added some members last week, and are now 90 cities representing about 650 million people globally and about a quarter of the world's GDP. And these are cities that are invited into the network because of their leadership on climate issues, whether it's on the adaptation side and resilient side, or whether it's on the greenhouse gas reduction side. And so we're very focused on organizing them technically to share best practices, organize them politically so that the mayors can, lead together.
Let's go to, this event is about infrastructure. Draw that connection between what communities need to be thinking about in terms of climate change and what they need to be thinking about in terms of their infrastructure.
Well, they're pretty much joined at the hip, right? I mean, the solutions that we need for climate are really about infrastructure, whether it's across energy, obviously, but also very much so transportation, and then going down to water and all the other issues. So particularly for cities like in the United States, where we have very high emissions relative to other cities in the world, we are looking at a real challenge to take emissions that are tied to energy grids, transportation grids, infrastructure, water systems, and others, and really having to reinvent. And so as we're reinvesting in infrastructure, we need to be looking for solutions that are lower carbon, that are carbon neutral, and that can help us continue to sustain and support our cities while also trying to control the threats of global warming.
Yeah, it's a very narrow line. I was just thinking about in Paris this week, because of the inversion problem they're having there, the Paris mayor has said, okay, no cars or half the number of cars that you can normally have, and let's make public transport free. But that has to be commitment to understanding both the community's appreciation for their environmental issue and their infrastructure need.
Yeah, and it's a great example. So Mayor Hidalgo of Paris is the chair of our organization, and just took that role last week. And
means everything, right?
Yeah, when she did that, she also signed on to an agreement with the mayors of Mexico City and Athens and Madrid to move off of diesel in the near term by 2025 for citywide. But it's a good example of how a goal, even at 2025, doesn't help the fact that you've got pressing health and immediate concerns. So they look to solutions. That one, for example, is the shifting every other day cars and transit-free are examples that have come from Delhi. Other cities and Mexico City that are really suffering with immediate health safety concerns from pollution and the same threats that affect climate are affecting people every day.
Right. Christine, in your city, in Norfolk, this is part of your life. The water, the community, its history, these are all connected.
Absolutely. Norfolk is really at the epicenter of what happens when water rises. We have land subsidence combined with sea level rise, and we see flooding on a fairly regular basis. Every king tide, many of our neighborhoods are underwater. Sometimes my transportation system is working as my water management system, which is a problem because people continue to drive on it, and so you see those pictures of floating cars on our underpasses. So, as we think about how we're going to adapt, we have to think about how we want to adapt our infrastructure in ways that allow us to live on the coast in the future.
So what does that mean for your city? Does it change where your investments go to?
It absolutely changes how we think about land use and what we'll invest in the future. We just finished something called our Vision 2100, when we asked all of our residents to come together and tell us, what makes Norfolk a unique place, and what do we want to keep about it as we have to change in relationship to our interface with the water. And so we really asked them to talk about looking at a map and saying, these places we need to harden against the sea, these places we need to
Levees,
adapt, berms, levees, tidal gates, these we need to adapt. There's no easy answer with that edge condition. How are we going to use architecture and new infrastructures to allow us to use that land in the future? These areas are underdeveloped and are high and dry. How should we use them, and how should we think about infrastructure investments like rail and transportation networks in the future, and use those areas because we know they will, be less impacted by sea level rise in the future. So it's a very long-term conversation, but it's a conversation we're starting already.
So you are at the micro level, as it were.
Going to a civic league meeting tonight. So yeah, micro.
So let's talk a little bit about the thing that is on everybody's mind in this city, of course, right now, which is what January will mean. A change of administrations, a change of focus perhaps, but a commitment by this administration, the incoming administration, to make significant infrastructure investments. For the communities, what does that mean? What are you anticipating?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you know Norfolk, you know we are a very heavy federal asset place. We have the largest naval station in the world. NATO North Atlantic Command is in Norfolk. We have Langley Air Force Base over in Hampton. And so we already are great partners with the federal government. And we're already working with them about thinking about how they maintain their mission readiness in a new water environment. And so we expect that that will continue, those conversations will continue.
But can you expect more support, or do you anticipate perhaps less from the federals?
Well, I'm hopeful that it'll be more, but we don't know what it will look like, and the financing of it is really the key. How do you invest in these long-term infrastructures? How do you bond? How do you get revenue sources that enable you to bond to make these long-term investments? And I think the federal government can help us with that.
This is the big question for all kinds of communities.
Yeah, and I think that, you go right quickly to finance, although you know then that the federal government was never going to give us enough money to solve the problems of local communities. So these are costs that cities were going to have to internalize, identify where the savings is from risk protection, where the savings is in energy or any number of, in terms of business development. How does a climate solution and a resilience solution improve the bottom line of the tax base for the city, improve quality of life, lower health costs? So there's a real need to very quickly, despite whoever's in the White House, to figure out how to make those connections. And we've been struggling around that for a long time.
But this is something that cannot happen without federal investment.
You need.
So your expectation cannot be, in a leadership that's already said, look, we want to downsize at the federal level.
Well, I think actually Norfolk's a great example. I don't want to speak for you, but I think that from any administration, you've seen consistent and strong leadership from the Defense Department on this issue. And I don't think they're going to walk away from the need to protect massive federal investments. And I think that carries over to economic investments in terms of cities and urban cores that are producing really the vast amount of sort of GDP and economic growth for the United States from, even though we're a big and diverse country, the large percentage of the GDP is coming from these urban centers. And so there's some real tension and apprehension right now about how this gets worked out. But I think that economic forces, the need to protect the economy and the GDP related to it, to protect key national assets or the National Mall and the nation's treasures. I think those become hard to avoid and hard to explain away. Well, we're not going to protect those anymore because we have a different climate philosophy.
But there is a notion that this administration is increasingly interested in privatization on a lot of levels.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
please.
I would say, that is the solution that we have to have anyway. Again, just to repeat, we're not going to find the federal government paying for this or the state government, and frankly, the taxpayers aren't either. You need to see major realignment, private equity, private investment, toward the solutions, technological or energy or water management, to make this work. And that's really been the challenge. I think that is the big challenge coming out of Paris. Those are really challenging objectives to meet. And unfortunately, much of the data is a little bit worse looking today than it was even a year ago. So the challenge may be greater than we thought it was. But that does create many, many opportunities. And we need to do that economic pivot to make sure people are making the money doing the things that we need to grow the economy in the right direction.
We talk about what the community's commitment is. I mean, there is another way to look at some of this, which is should there be some retreat? Should a community like yours, which facing the rising tide of concern, as it were, maybe needs to be responsible also for pulling back?
So I would say that that's what Vision 2100 was about. It's about identifying those areas of the city over time that we need to think about how we use differently. But I've been there since 1600, and I've got Naval Station Norfolk about...
Wow, you're doing really
I'm looking
well.
good, right? But it's an important city. It really is at the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. It defends the capital from naval attack. It's got the largest naval station in the world. You can't do that from West Virginia. I think there are some cities that are just going to be on the coast in the future, and my job is to figure out how you can do that. How can you reduce risk of living on the coast enough so that you can continue the important work that we do? And I agree with Brendan. This has to be an understanding that this is real risk reduction, and there's value in that across the economy in both the private and the public sectors. And how do you begin to capture some of that, the value of that reduced risk, to begin financing these projects? And so it's a long problem to solve. It's a long time frame that we've got to solve it, but we've got to figure out the financing of it first, and then pick the projects that make the most sense, that allow us to reduce the risk the most and bring the most economic value to the country.
Sorry, I was just going to add that one of the things that we're focused on going into next year is trying to really measure the benefits. Some people call them co-benefits, multiple benefits. But I mean, we're at a point where we no longer have the luxury to just go spend $1 trillion on roads, because the costs would be too great.
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, everybody. I can appreciate you're wanting to protect your community, but let's face it, there are a lot of people who say, okay, infrastructure, and the Republican Party platform has included infrastructure investment in roads and bridges as the priority.
Right. Well, and you need the roads and bridges, but I think that for every dollar you spend, whether it's on a road and a bridge or whether it's on another solution, you have to be demanding that it's designed for the multiple benefits. It has to be resilient for the next 50 and 100 years. It has to ideally be something that's serving that community, not bypassing that community. Providing value locally, that's contributing to health, to the public health, so that you don't spend $1 trillion making people sick, and then you have to treat them. And so you really have to look across in a way that I don't think we've done effectively before. You need to look across the community, across the way you're spending money, because that money for transportation is going to flow down, and much of it's going to go to community by community. And you need to try to hold those dollars up to a test of how many benefits can we get for every dollar we spend. How much savings can we get? And
campaigning for your own community's greatest needs. I know that there are questions in the audience for you, so I want to encourage anybody who's got questions to come forward and speak on that. There's a gentleman on the side here. Our fast-running microphone operator is coming to that.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tyler Clevenger from WRI. I think it's reasonable to expect that as soon as he can, Trump might want to announce sort of a flashy, big-ticket infrastructure transportation item that he could tweet about and sort of be seen as a quick win for the administration. I'm just wondering if you have any projects in mind that could be a quick win for them, but also be seen as sort of a win for the sustainability or environmental community.
Well, I don't know if I'll mention one specifically, other than to say every city that's a member of our organization and every city that's a member of any number of these organizations has a laundry list. Right, and so it's whether it's road and bridge emergency related work, whether it's neighborhood redevelopment, complete streets, mass transit, water infrastructure, and every one of those, there's a better way to do it and spend the money, and there's a worse way to do it. And so I think it's less about the specific project, the shovel-ready project that the city might have. It's less about that and more about how they execute it. If we go with business as usual, if we pull out the same contract, and if we build the same project going forward, we're going to lock ourselves in to a real problematic situation.
But wouldn't you want to offer up a quick shovel-ready? As Tyler suggests, maybe this is the moment. Maybe you should seize the day here.
Yeah. So we are in a planning phase with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to look at the entire city and how to protect it from flooding in the future. And So that will offer up many projects through the Corps to begin infrastructure improvements in the city to protect us against rising tides.
There was a gentleman I know over here on the.
I would just add while you're doing that, in the world of these things, the $1 trillion number that's being floated around does not really go very far.
I tell you, $1 trillion, it was really worth $1 trillion.
We could divvy up $1 trillion quite quickly. And a number of cities, for instance, Los Angeles, the voters there just approved $120 billion for one city on one range of projects related to transportation. So the needs are extraordinarily high.
Hi, my name's Tom Payne of RTP Consultants. I have a question about the rising tides. I assume that is a key element. And I'm wondering, you talk about the Corps of Engineers, and are they looking at building dikes like in Holland?
So we're looking at a range or an alternatives of solutions to different water features, right? We have multiple edge conditions in the city of Norfolk, some of which appropriate for berming or tidal gates, some of which are appropriate for green infrastructure and wetlands as a way to protect the community from flooding. So it's a combination of alternatives and a combination, and what we like to think of as a layered approach to protecting the city from flooding.
There is sort of that laboratory of Louisiana right now where we have the opportunity. Has that influenced Norfolk?
Absolutely. We have worked with New Orleans, and Jeff Hebert is the CRO down there. We've worked with the Dutch, which they have also worked with, to really conceptualize how we'll proceed in the future. And it's been a great partnership.
Yeah, I mean, as Tom was referring to, the dikes, we look at models in other places and how they have or haven't been effective and what the drawbacks are in that. And that, I suppose, is part of the exchange of C40.
Yeah, very much. One of our most active networks is called Connecting Delta Cities. And it's very much around, so it's New Orleans and Rotterdam and Boston and New York City. Washington has just recently joined, right? Because we're right in the bullseye here as a tidal city. And with future projections for sea level rise as sort of an everyday situation, but also then the storm surge scenarios, which are pretty dire. So you have, for instance, DC Water, the city's utility here, is moving its levees up right now, investing significantly to protect water infrastructure up to, I believe it's 500-foot floods plus extra freeboard, they call it. So we have a number of cities that are moving very proactively and working together through 100RC and also the National Disaster Resilience Competition that Norfolk was awarded grants through.
I should say, in a short time, we expect to talk to Mayor Bowser as well about her visions for the city here. If there are not other questions in here, I just, looking ahead, looking into the new year, looking into the change of administrations and what you're seeing there, what has been announced already by the incoming administration as well. I just wonder what can you offer to your member cities as direction about how they can move forward, and for a community like yours as well? What can you say? This is the way we need to go right now.
Well, generally we've had. And Mayor Bowser was at our global meeting just last week in Mexico City and speaking with fellow U.S. mayors. There's a realization that they had this issue on their plate already, right? So it may get a little more challenging. Hopefully we'll get the support you need from the federal level. But these were issues that the local communities were having to deal with already. And so the ability to work together, to go to finance markets, to go to technology providers, and really help drive new solutions and do it very quickly with a new sense of urgency, because we don't really have time to waste, particularly where you have vulnerable cities sitting on the coastline.
Yeah, I would say resilient cities don't wait for people to come and save them. They move forward on their own. They look for partners who are willing, and they move forward. And that's what we're doing. We're doing that at the state level. We're doing that at the federal level. We're doing that among cities in the United States. And we're reaching across the world to find new solutions that work for cities just like us. And we believe that once we find them, there'll be economic engines for us in the future.
And private partnerships?
Absolutely.
So what kinds of things would that include?
So through the platform partners, we're looking at big data analytics. We're looking at new ways of thinking about incorporating infrastructure, disruptive ways in which we can use new types of infrastructure that's less expensive, just on and on and on. We're open for innovation.
Well, there is indeed no time to waste. Thank you both very much. Appreciate your participation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.